Hello and welcome to Pickleball Therapy, the podcast dedicated to your pickleball improvement. Hope you're having a great week. This week's podcast is going to be awesome. We have an interview with Lynn Cherry. If you follow pickleball podcasts at all, then you may already know Lynn from her podcast at Pickleball Fire. We're going to talk to Lynn a little bit about pickleball, her background in pickleball, where she sees the sport going, things like that. It should be a really interesting conversation, so looking forward to that interview with Lynn. And in the riff, we're going to talk a little bit about your journey. What am I talking about? We'll find out on the riff. Let's get ready for the podcast. You'd like to help your friend or family member learn how to play pickleball, but how? Now it's easy. Pick up a copy of Play Pickleball, A Beginner's Guide. It's the most complete guide to playing pickleball. Available as a digital download or in hard copy at intopickle.com or at Amazon. Let's keep growing the sport. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, today we're joined by Lynn Cherry. Lynn is not just a pickleball player, she's also a pickleball content creator just like we are. She actually runs both a podcast or does the content and runs all of it, a podcast and a magazine, each called Pickleball Fire. Welcome to the podcast, Lynn.
Thanks so much, Tony. It's great to be here.
Lynn, we're going to get into your pickleball playing and stuff like that, but I want to lead with Pickleball Fire. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about when you're putting together the Pickleball Fire magazine and podcast. Kind of what are you trying to achieve or communicate to pickleball players with your podcast and magazine?
I started the podcast in October of 2020 during the pandemic. I definitely had some extra time on my hands, and honestly, I was really interested in bringing on people who could help players' games. And not only that, but also people from the industry, because I think that's important too. And, I have a podcast episode where I talk to typically, a coach, a senior pro, a pro, and I always make sure to have some type of focus really with the podcast so people can get, some specific tips on how to improve your game, because that's certainly important. And one of the things too, as a trained sports psychologist, I do like to cover both the physical and mental side of the game. I really think that the mental side of the game perhaps doesn't get as much love as it might, as it should, because in a lot of ways, so much of the game is mental. But yeah, I realized too, as I was doing all these podcast interviews, I had all this content and I'm like, well, you know what? There's a whole another set of people who don't necessarily listen to podcasts, but they're, interested in reading, in this case, a digital magazine to get instruction and hear what's going on in the industry. So I'm like, why let those interviews go to waste? So it's kind of a dual purpose when I do an interview. Typically is, interview for the podcast, and then I include all that in the magazine too.
Yeah, it sounds like a really, really good way to get information out to pickleball players. And I know we've already done this. We've already spoken before about this in other contexts, but I always like to thank, folks who like you who give of your time to help grow the sport, because, as you and I were talking about earlier before we got on the podcast, this is such a wonderful, not just sport. It's a great sport, but it's just a wonderful life activity for so many people, so many folks that, I just think it's a sport that every person, hopefully in the world at some point, has the ability to be exposed to this sport. And if they choose to play it, great. If they don't choose to play it, that's their choice, but at least have the exposure and the ability to play it, because it's just, I think it's life-changing for a lot of players. And Lynn, maybe tell us a little bit about how you got into pickleball and maybe some of your experiences and how it's impacted your life beyond, you can include the podcast and the magazine, but even beyond that, kind of how it's had an influence in your life.
Sure. I started playing pickleball back in 2018, which isn't that long ago, but I moved to Connecticut after growing up in Southern California, living in Texas for 25 years. And so when I got to Connecticut, I'm kind of looking around thinking, what the heck am I going to do during the winter? Because I was always very active in sports. And so I just, looked at what the activities were at the recreation center, and lo and behold, I read this thing called pickleball, and I'm like, wonder what that is. So of course, you do what you do nowadays, where you get on YouTube and check out the game. And my background was as a open racquetball player. So I'm like, Oh, I think I would love that sport. So yeah, that's how I got started. And, interestingly enough, it's definitely one of those things where, like most people, as soon as I started playing, I was addicted. And so like a month after I started playing, I actually started the Pickleball Fire website because I'm like, this is the greatest game, and I'd never had kind of a content website before. And I'm like, I want to just share this with people as much as possible because it is such a great game. So, that's how I got started. And like I said before, the podcast just kind of came out of having extra time during the pandemic. And these things are definitely a lot of work, but I love doing it. If I didn't love it, I wouldn't do it. That's exactly how I feel about pickleball. And there are so many life lessons with pickleball. And like I think everybody talks about, just everybody being so welcoming regardless of your age or your physical ability. You can get out there on the court, and I so encourage everybody to do so. And I'm sure that your audience is out there enjoying the game too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's something that, what I always tell folks, we always suggest folks share this podcast, share our videos, share the information, get people out there playing. I mean, it's just such a fantastic sport for, for players to come into. But let me ask you a question on, you mentioned you're a sports psychologist, and you know that we're big fans of Coach Peter Scales and his thoughts on pickleball and pickleball, mental and emotional kind of stability or training in pickleball and things like that. What are your thoughts on, one of the things that happens a lot in our experience, and particularly like we're talking about now, when you have somebody come into the sport who maybe doesn't have a sporting background or, hasn't dealt with these kind of things before, and maybe they feel a little uncomfortable on the court, or maybe the lack of confidence sometimes being out on the court. Is there something that you can think of, or not think of, something you can share that would help somebody like that when they're out on the court not feel so maybe insecure or lack of confidence when they're out there?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And, even as experienced players, definitely can lack some confidence. I know we were talking earlier, as I have moved up in skill levels, it's kind of like, having those doubts. And, it's like, do I belong on this court? Do I, belong playing with these people? But I think the main thing to do is, when you're out there, make sure you enjoy yourself. I mean, first and foremost, we're pretty much, probably everybody who's listening to this is an amateur. We don't get paid. So know the reasons why you're out there, and to, have some physical activity, have some socialization, and just enjoy yourself. And I think if you can start from that perspective, it really helps. Because I kind of questioned this myself yesterday, and I'm like, I'm feeling so insecure, because if I'm playing well, I can play with these people, but if I'm not playing well, I can't. And then I'm like, well, that's silly, Lynn. Just go out there and have a good time. So I myself, got out on the court today, and I definitely put those thoughts out of my mind. And actually, let me say this. First, I had a good warm up, because I think the day before I had not warmed up well. So the first thing that I did was, let's have a good warm up. And then once you're really ready to play that first game, then you really do have to block those thoughts out. So in psychology, it's almost kind of like a thought stopping technique, where if you are thinking about something that's, negative, whether you missed a shot, or you don't feel like you belong, or you're not good enough, or what have you, I mean, you literally need to give yourself kind of a cue word to stop that thought. I mean, it could be something as simple as, stop, or, whatever cue word works for you. You might have a elastic band on your wrist, and you snap it, and, that's just a cue to remind yourself to, to focus. And I think too, the more you can look at the ball, track it wherever that ball is on the court, that also helps you to be more focused on the game rather than kind of what's going on inside your head. So those are just a few tips that might be helpful for folks.
Awesome. Really appreciate that. And, what's interesting hearing you speak, Lynn, is, you mentioned that you came over from racquetball, right? You were an open racquetball player?
That's right.
Right. So you're obviously a good racquetball player. You're confident, good racquetball player. You know what you're doing. And, a lot of the players that play pickleball, have never played any kind of racket sport or maybe even any kind of sport in their history. So to hear that players like you and players like me who've played 40 years of tennis still get, sometimes get anxious out there when we're playing or feel insecure out there, hopefully will help some of the listeners. But one of the things that you mentioned, Lynn, that I think I'd like to maybe hone in on a little more is you talked about, kind of like not preparing, right? So basically going out before you get out on the court, having, thinking about it a little bit, right? And putting some, I don't know if it's context or how you approach it, but the idea of not stepping out on the court and then waiting until you miss the shot to then react to it, right? Getting ready before you get out there. And maybe if you can talk about that a little more, about maybe some things that players can think about or do. We always tell players, if you don't have any other idea, listen to our podcast for 10 or 12 minutes while you're driving to the courts. They can probably listen to Pickleball Fire as well, just to kind of get their minds straight. But there are some other things that you can think of that players could do to prepare before the alarm bells goes off in people's minds when they miss that shot or pop the ball up.
Yeah, I think in terms of preparation I think a lot of people don't like to hear this, but I think especially for people who are coming into the sport without necessarily a racket sport background, if you can find an instructor to work with, somebody to take you through drills here in Connecticut in the West Hartford area, there's some amazing programs where, you've got classes. And that's one of the things too with Pickleball Fire is because I, list tournaments and, clinics and this and that. I have so many requests of people as to, how can I get started? Where can I find an instructor? But just going through that and, practicing, whether it's with an instructor or, with a friend, that's going to make you feel so much more comfortable on the court. And just remember, it needs to be focused practice though. So just kind of out there, batting the ball and talking about, whatever else is going on. That's okay to do that. No doubt about that. But if you really want to feel like you're kind of ready to play, I think, just again, kind of zooming in and focusing on that ball can really help people.
Yeah. I think Yvonne Ting, who we both know, a senior pro player, very accomplished player, talks about, gaining confidence through repetition, right? Just, the more you hit the ball, the more you're out on the court, the more confident you're going to feel. Definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Lynn, you mentioned, Pickleball Fire's looking at the mental part of the game. I think that's fantastic because I agree with you. I don't think enough attention is paid to the mental part of the game. I think we have enough third shot videos, right? I mean, there's got to be, 800 third shot videos, 400 ready position videos, things like that. But, in terms of the mental part of the game, there's really a dearth of information in our sport. And so I think that's awesome. Let me ask you, so obviously if I know where the podcast is. If you want to listen to Lynn's podcast, please check it out. It's Pickleball Fire. I'm assuming it's available on all platforms, Lynn?
That's right. Whether you have Android or Windows or Apple, it's available everywhere. Probably the most common place still people get it regardless of the platform or their device is actually on Apple Podcasts. You can also just simply go to pickleballfire.com/podcast and you can listen to the episode right on the website. You don't even have to go anywhere else to do that.
And when they go to the pickleballfire.com, actually I said the Pickleball Fire, it's pickleballfire.com, right?
Correct. Pickleballfire.com.
And I'll link to that below in the show notes. Is that also where can they subscribe to the Pickleball Fire magazine at that same location?
Yes, absolutely. If they just go to pickleballfire.com/magazine, they can see the latest issue. And if they like it, they can subscribe to the magazine.
Awesome. So that's the best way to stay in touch with Lynn Cherry and see what's going on with Lynn Cherry, right?
That's right. Or feel free to shoot me an email, Lynn, Lynn, @pickleballfire.com.
Lynn, I really appreciate everything that you're doing, again, for the growth of pickleball, sharing information, interviewing folks, and getting their information out to players who want to improve in their game. And really appreciate you coming on to the Pickleball Therapy Podcast.
Well, thanks, Tony. I'm really happy to be here today.
Really appreciate Lynn coming on to the podcast. If you haven't done so already, again, I highly recommend you check out Pickleball Fire. Lynn stays on top of current events with the game. She also has a really good perspective on the game, so it can be really helpful to give you some more context as you improve and grow as a pickleball player. Coming up on the Riff, some of my thoughts about your pickleball journey. Stay tuned for the Riff. You've studied the pickleball videos, maybe read a pickleball book, taken a lesson or two, but there's just something missing, something to complete the whole picture. That's where VI Pickleball comes in. VI Pickleball is the most immersive pickleball learning community available today. You can check out more information at wearepickleball.com. See you in the community. This week's Riff, I want to talk to you a little bit about your journey. So what do we talk about when we talk about your journey? And what made me think about it is the Olympics. And, I know there's some controversy with Simone Biles and her decision not to participate anymore in the event, given her mental state. It happened also with Naomi Osaka in tennis when she pulled out of the French Open, as I recall, and indicated that she needed some time to herself. And what's interesting is, we can sit here and I guess we can second guess and we can think about what Simone or Naomi Osaka and players like that or people like that are going through. But really at the end of the day, right, when we're engaging in any kind of activity, whether it's pickleball or anything else you do in your life, at the end of the day, it's your journey. In other words, it's you're the one, and it affects you, right? You're the one that has to make decisions of what is best for you. And an example in pickleball specifically would be, what do you want to do with pickleball? Like, what does pickleball mean to you? Do you want to become a tournament hardened, veteran player going the circuit and traveling and playing in all the tournaments? I know several players that do that. They seem to enjoy it. It seems to bring them happiness in their life, and that's great. That's awesome. Do it if you can do it. But maybe you just say, I just want to play pickleball socially. I want to get a little better on the court. I want to understand the game better. I want to grow as a person. But at the end of the day, for me, it's a social and physical activity kind of a thing. Gets me out of the house once or twice, or maybe more than that a week. And I get to the courts. I say hi to my friends. I get a sweat. That's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can still have an improvement sort of regimen. I use that term loosely. Can't think of another word on the fly right now. But, you can have an improvement regimen even if you're going to be a social sort of recreational player. But, maybe there you're saying, okay, I want to learn at a different pace. And again, at the end of the day, right, what is it? It's your journey. So this is your journey, or, the path that you need to walk as your own pickleball player. And don't make decisions based on, what another person is doing or what, somebody else might think you should do. At the end of the day, make the decision based on what's best for you as a person and as a player. And that's going to give you hopefully the most happiness in how pickleball interacts with your life, and that I think that at the end of the day is what we're looking for, regardless of what you're trying to do, tournament down to rec play, in terms of how you want to interact with pickleball. So, and by the way, I said down to rec play. I don't mean that in any kind of pejorative way. I just mean in terms of a scale. So, anyway, I hope that this helps you think about the game maybe a little bit differently and your interaction with the game. And it helps you have a better perspective, because at the end of the day, pickleball is a part of a bigger picture of your life as in your journey, and hopefully, you can keep a good balance with it, and it brings happiness to you and joy. So, hope you enjoyed the podcast this week. If you enjoyed it, as always, please give it a rating and share it with your friends. Remember, if you liked it, they probably will too. Stay well out there, and we'll see you next week.